Well, welcome back to the Janelle King Show. If you're listening on the radio, this is Extra 106.3. If you're on YouTube, thank you for joining us. And you get to actually see Mr. Philip Clay where everyone else can hear him. But that being said, it's all good. Before the break, I gave you a whole introduction of who Mr. Clay is. I just kind of broke that down a little bit so you know who you are listening to. If you're on YouTube, you can just hit pause and go to the description and you can read a quick little blurb about his bio and just kind of understand who he is. But believe me, when we get finished with this interview, you'll know who he is, okay? So don't worry. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're so happy to have you. And this is actually interesting. You're breaking up the monotony of me interviewing all Georgia people. So thank you.
I love it. Some great things have happened for me in Georgia. So I'm happy to be down where your people are.
Oh, awesome. Well, we're going to get into that a little bit too. The conversation that you all are listening to was part of my series called the Candid Conversations, which is also Candid Conversations. And that's because I like to just kind of dive in and find out who the person is, as well as hearing about their race, all the other political stuff. This is where we highlight people in conversations for those who are in office and those who are on the trail. So welcome. Again, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you, Philip. And we're going to jump straight in with just tell us a little bit about yourself, right? I kind of want to know about your upbringing. How was it? What was your political leanings as a child with your parents? And what are some key milestones that have shaped your political beliefs?
Yeah, well, again, I'm Philip Clay, and I'm from Plainfield, Indiana, and I'm incredibly excited to be on the show. I would say that my upbringing was conventional to some and unconventional to others. I grew up in a household where my dad, and I'll always say he's my dad, signed my birth certificate and everything, but he's not my biological father. So he's a huge proponent in my life, someone that I really look up to and admire. So I grew up with my mom and my dad. I have a brother and a sister who are 8 and 13 years younger than I am. So there's a bit of an age gap between us. So it took Big Brother to a whole different meaning for us. But I grew up in Plainfield, which is a predominantly white community. It's a suburb of Indianapolis, just on the west side. And it's really the greatest thing I've ever known. The community itself has just been so welcoming to us, and I've lived here my entire life. I think there was 3 years there's a gap where we were in surrounding areas that still touch Plainfield, but not Plainfield exactly. And growing up, I would say it was a conservative household, but I think what's really cool about my parents is they gave me the ability to really understand that there are other choices out there. And even though they were conservatives and they really pushed conservative values, anytime I had a question, they would always be willing to answer those questions or kind of help me come to the conclusion of those myself, just give me the opportunity to explore.
Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. That was great. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your background, a little insight into how you were brought up and how. But let's go a little bit deeper. What was the impact on you being brought up in a predominantly white area? Was your family conservative? And if so, what was the messaging to you as a Black guy?
Yeah, and it's one of those things growing up in a white community, and really not. I never really saw myself as Black. I think the first time I remember being consciously aware of my skin color was in second grade. Ironically enough, I just saw that teacher over the weekend, so it was good to reminisce with her. But she was talking about Martin Luther King and just the impacts that racism had on schools and just life in general, society. And I remember her saying, little boys and girls like Philip and Donnie and Kayla wouldn't be able to be in class with us today if it weren't for some of the sacrifices that were made. And it's kind of one of those moments where you look around and you're like, am I really different than everybody? And then you start to kind of notice. And my parents were phenomenal, and again, letting me ask questions and helping me kind of come to conclusions on my own. I think it's different growing up in a predominantly white community and trying to find really what your race is. So I could see culture's impact. I could see, the historical impact. And then I can kind of see where I fit in through everything else. So again, it wasn't a conventional upbringing, but I think it really helped me shape opinions to where I am now. And I think sometimes we get into, if it's the only thing that we've ever known, it's hard to understand differing opinions. And for me, it was something almost that I found. And so I feel like I've got some unique perspectives in that. My family being conservative, again, they really never pushed anything particular. I mean, it was conservative household. We Christians, we go to church, we went to youth group and Sunday school and all of that. But the values really weren't any different. And then as I started to gain more Black friends, as Plainfield got more diverse, I realized that a lot of the things that my parents had taught me were the same things that theirs had taught them. So there really wasn't any lag or any difference. I would say it was pretty conventional.
What's fascinating about that is I grew up in an apolitical home as well, and I grew up in a predominantly Black area, and so but just having that little bit of freedom to decide for yourself, having parents who believed in instilling values versus perspectives and ideology, I think is so impactful, and I wish more parents would do that, rather than trying to guide people into one direction or the other. Let's just instill those values, because you're absolutely right. That's what drew me to the Republican Party, is I looked at how I was raised, the principles that they instilled in me, and it aligned more with the Republican Party. So that's how it was. It was just that simple for me. So I really do understand that. Tell us a little bit about your professional background.
Yeah, so I'm 29, so I like to say I've done a bit of everything in my time. So I started working at 15. And I was actually in shoe sales, the perfect job for a 15-year-old, a sophomore in high school. I worked at Finish Line, and it was kind of cool because a couple of my buddies worked there. And what was really unique about that is I went into the job expecting to hang out with friends, but what I really found was a real passion for sales. And I think what's more is helping people. It's one thing to put somebody in a shoe. It's another thing to be like, no, I can get you the shoe that's going to help you with that knee pain that you're having. Or, if you're having issues on the court, here's a shoe that's going to help you with, maybe not sliding around. It's going to give you a bit more traction, and just working through that kind of stuff. And from sales, I would say I've always had somewhat of a sales role, be it professional sales like car sales, or be it, floor sales at like a hardware store, and somehow combined all of that and found my way into banking. And banking is just really kind of, I like to say it's where I've grown up. It's where I met my wife. I had my first kid in banking. It's just, it's where I've grown up. And I think it's a really cool opportunity to combine sales with really genuinely helping people.
That's wonderful. Okay, so now let's get a little bit deeper into politics. Some of the current affairs that are going on right now. I mean, we have the border, we have abortion, we have economy. I mean, it's just so much happening right now. Of all the things that are in the forefront of our minds politically, what would you say is the most important from your vantage point?
And maybe this is just a banker's perspective, but I think the economy is definitely something that we have to acknowledge. I mean, it's something that we really have to work to get back to, even those pre and during the Trump administration, not just policies, but the economy itself. I just saw that inflation had risen again this morning or over the last month. It's one of those things where you sit back and you do an inventory, especially during a presidential election, and Biden's campaigning on Build Back Better. And it's like, I don't know if anything's really been built. I don't know if anything's really back. And I know things certainly aren't better. So I would say the economy is something that we absolutely have to look at. And, really early on, I was able to give some opinions on the economy and the jobs reports and some of those things. And at a certain point, I don't think the Bureau of Labor Statistics starts to account for the people that are working 2 and 3 jobs to, have the same amount of money that they used to have the same amount of money that they would have had with just one job, to buy the same things they would have with just one job. So I think the economy is an incredibly important thing. But I think everything that you listed, I mean, the border is out of control. I mean, we've got millions of migrants that are flooding in, and we really don't know who some of these people are. And that's incredibly scary. Every state is now a border state. And, I've had friends, I haven't had a chance to go to Eagle Pass myself yet, but I've had friends and, our county sheriff here in Hendricks County. that have gone to the border, and it's really a humanitarian crisis. I mean, these coyotes are leaving people at the border, and they're trying to get under the barbed wire at Eagle Pass, and there's people that are quite literally drowning in the river that can't get through, and the government can't touch them, or the border patrol agents can't touch them, because then they become a liability of the U.S. government. And abortion is something that I think we've started to get a handle on it here in Indiana, but I think some of these other states, the more liberal states, are starting to really ramp up, and that's incredibly concerning. So I think there's a myriad of things that we can look at this political season. Just, I think we have to start with one and see what we can work through the rest of the list with.
Indiana is a primarily Republican state, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you say? What is your message around the abortion topic? Because I know that's something that the left is going to probably pretty much harp on going into 2024. But what is your stance on abortion, and how is it impacting your state?
Yeah, well, Indiana's a super majority. So we have both the House and the Senate, and we've got the 2 senators, the gubernatorial seat. I mean, it's massive, our lead here in Indiana. Abortion is something that impacts everybody. And like I said, I think what we're seeing now is we've drastically reduced the number of abortions that are happening in Indiana, but now some of those people are fleeing to Ohio and Chicago and Michigan and some of these other states, which is really just disheartening. And I think one of the things that we have to look at in Indiana, and one of the things I'm most excited about with our campaign, is we have to look at adoption reform. We have to look at, zero cost and no cost adoption options. And I think that's incredibly important. We've saved these babies, or we are saving these babies. Now we need to make sure that they're going to the right homes. And I think that includes a look at, DCS and the foster care system, to make sure that a lot of these systems are really doing what they're saying they're doing, and the funds that are supposed to be going to them are being used for the right purposes. So that's incredibly important to us here in Indiana.
I have this weird thing. I get chills when I hear of solutions in politics, because it's so rare. It's so rare. But when you mention the adoption reform, I got chills, because I'm like, oh my God, yes. I mean, we've got to have policies that's going to stretch across the broad spectrum of this conversation. It can't only be protecting, life and in the womb, So I love that. I think you definitely should push that heavily, particularly in your area. Now, let's touch on, before we jump into your particular race, let's look at this. Can you create a landscape of Indiana for those that are watching from other states? What is the political landscape? Because you're running against an incumbent who is a Republican. So you are in a Republican primary. I mean, are you dealing with the factions? Like, is it like here we have like the traditional Republicans, establishment, MAGA, like the whole bit, right?
Yeah.
Where do you fall, and how is that impacting your race, and what's the landscape for Indiana?
Yeah, so I'm a conservative Republican. I tend to think of myself more of like a Reagan Republican. I think a lot of Republicans romanticize that time, but they really don't put anything in action to getting back to those times. I think that President Trump was probably the closest that we've been, especially in my lifetime, short lifetime. Again, I'm only 29, but I think that's the closest that we've been. And I think that's something that we really need to get back to. And I'm very much a diplomacy over daggers type of person, and you see a lot of infighting that happens with the Republican Party, and it's concerning, and especially in Indiana, right? In a supermajority, you have people that are, constitutionalists, and then you have people that are, farther right than the constitutionalists, and then you have people that are more moderate Republicans. And I think politics has been so polarized right now that we're afraid to get anything done. And in Indiana, and I keep using the analogy, I played football growing up, with a supermajority, we should be putting the ball in the end zone constantly. We should be scoring so much that it just gets boring at some point. We have to shake things up. But I think that's what we really need to get back to. And I think we need to get back to having those conversations. And instead of reaching across ourselves to reach across the aisle, I think we have to work within our own party to get things done, because we have the votes, we have the ability to do so. It's just what we need to get back to. And I am running against an incumbent. He's a 35-year incumbent. And so it's a bit different situation. I know one of the, I'm sure in campaigning, one of the primary rules is thou shalt not, primary an incumbent. But, in our situation, our incumbent's left the Republican caucus. He's not showing up to committee meetings. He's lost his committee chairmanships, and he's really just ineffective. And, this isn't the job that I want, but it's the job I need to do. And I, ask a bunch of people to look around and step up, and really no one wanted to step up. And so thankfully my wife and son are on board, and we decided that we were going to step in and we were going to impact and make change.
That's interesting. 35 years. You're part of this new generation of politics. I feel like I'm a part of that as well, being part of the younger class of politics. And we hit different,
Yeah.
I think we've understood, and we're continuing to understand that in this world, people are not going to pass the baton. You probably have to take it out of their hand, because it's not about the person who's holding it. It's about where you taking the baton, right? And that is something that our generation is fully equipped to debate, understand, because at the end of it all, majority of the people who are in office that are older is not going to have to deal with or feel the effects of the decisions that are being made as much as we will and our children will. So there is a righteous indignation that comes upon us as younger conservatives to step up and make sure that we're doing what's right as it relates to our future. So this whole idea of not primarying incumbents, that's out of the water. We got to let that go. If you're not doing it right, if you're going to affect my children, you're out. Secondly, this whole idea of not sharing what our opponent is doing, in other words, don't speak bad is what they say, out of the water. If you're doing something, now I'm not talking about salacious stuff, but if you're doing something in office that is wrong, we're going to talk about it, because this is how we ensure that we have the right people in those seats. That being said, I saw there was a lot of articles around Black on Black crime. When it comes to you, where do you stand on the crime and those type of issues?
Yeah, well, and I think really, to talk specifically about Indianapolis, we've seen crime just spiral out of control. And it's really under Democrat policies. Joe Hockstett's been the mayor in Indianapolis for, I think this is his third term now. And it's not gotten any better. He won the majority vote. He had more straight ticket votes than our primary our general election challenger on the Republican ticket had votes in general. And so it's very blue. And I think one of the things that we have to do, and especially something that we're looking at in the General Assembly, is getting these ineffective prosecutors out of office. If they're not going to do the job, then we need to get somebody in that will. And I think we can, at a certain point, and you kind of referenced it just a moment ago, but we can stand around and we can talk about things, or we can get in action. And, I hate to reference, just stuff that we talk about at home, but we're about action. That's what we're here for. I'm not content to be on the sidelines. I'm not content to watch from the stands. We have to get involved. We have to get in the game, and we have to, suit up and make some of these plays.
Now, your opponent sits on, or he was on a committee, I think it was the Correction and Crime and Law Committee. But outside of that, what has, I'm going to say his name, Michael, what has he done that you feel poses a challenge to your race, or has he not done anything? Where do you stand as it relates to your opponent?
Yeah, and I absolutely respect Mike. And he and I had a really good conversation. And honestly, that conversation is part of the reason why I'm running. It's one of those things where I don't believe in not having honest conversations with people. That's just who I am. If there's something that needs to be said, we're going to talk it out, and we're going to work through it, for better or for worse. And I told Mike that I was running, and I said, at the end of the day, I want to run a race that's respectful to you, and I hope you could do the same for me. And he doesn't drink coffee. I know that about him, but I said, at the end of the day, I hope we can sit down and drink a Coke or play around a golf and talk through things. My issue with Mike isn't that Mike hasn't been a great legislator. He has been. It's that he's cited personal differences with Republican leadership, and because of that, he's sitting on the sidelines. And when that begins to affect our district, there's not a ton about Indiana that people really know. But when you start talking about Indiana, people talk about the Motor Speedway, they talk about our airport, and they talk about our law enforcement. The Law Enforcement Academy, the Indianapolis International Airport, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway are all in the district that I'm running for. So we have three of the biggest things that people talk about in the district, and we have a senator who's not representing us the way he should be. And to me, that's why I'm running. That's the action that we're about, and that's what we're here to change.
Can you give us the breakdown of your district? What number? What if there's counties involved? What do I need to know if I'm not in Indiana? And then most importantly, for those who are in Indiana, like, who are your constituent base? What areas what areas should pay attention to your race?
Absolutely. So it's Senate District 35, State Senate District 35, and that includes Speedway, Plainfield, Indianapolis, Decatur Township, Canby, Clayton, and Hazelwood. So that would be Marion County and Hendricks County. It's very split. It's about 137,000 people in total. And our district is incredibly important because a lot of the donut counties, which is what we'd call the counties that surround Indianapolis on 465, a lot of the donut counties are Republican, but they could very easily go purple. They could very easily go blue, especially with the influence that Indianapolis has right now. This race is incredibly important because typically the winner of the primary is the winner of the general. And we have a choice right now. And with so few people turning out for primaries, we have a real opportunity right now to really set our policy for the next legislative session and understand what we're going to do for the community. And I would just encourage people to get involved. One way or the other, get involved, because I think it's incredibly important.
What are your key platform items that you're running on that separates you from your opponents, but also shows forward thinking?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the same things. We have a lot of similar ideas, right? And it's a Republican primary, so they're all going to sound very similar. Obviously, being anti-abortion, pro-law enforcement, pro-tax reform, pro-adoption reform, pro-border security, because I think we absolutely need to secure the borders. I think the biggest difference between my opponent and I is I'm for term limits. I think that we should have, I don't want to give a specific number, but I have a number in mind, and it's way less than 15 years that someone should be in office, because I believe the founding fathers never intended for us to be in office for that long. And, you know, to me, it's one of those things where if you sit in office for 35 years, at a certain point, that's time enough for multiple generations to have grown up under your leadership. And if there's really not been a noticeable change, then it's time for new leadership. And I think that's the biggest differentiator between us.
Okay, and are there any bills or policies that you would like to jump on day one? I'm going in with this topic in mind or this issue in mind.
Yeah, you know, for me, the biggest thing is school choice. I think that's incredibly important. The ability for parents to decide the educational system that works best for their children. My mom's a charter school teacher, and so school choice is something that's very near and dear to our family and something that we understand a great deal. And I also think that we have to look at property taxes. You know, the average property tax bill in Indiana right now is just over $1,300, and I think that's incredibly high. We shouldn't have to rent our homes from the government. We should be able to own our homes outright. And then, you know, at the end of the day, I think we have to look at workforce development. And Indiana is, I think, 7th in attracting college students to the state. We're 47th in retaining them. So what does that tell you? It tells you that Indiana is training a bunch of kids to go and work in other states. And Indiana has an incredible story to tell. We just have to do a better job of telling it, and we have to do a better job of keeping our students here. And I think that's a really big push for us.
Okay, great. All right. Now, really quick, before we get into the fun part, which would be really fast and quick fire, but I want to touch on some social issues, because I feel like as people are watching this, you're from Indiana, you're a Black man, you're conservative. Where do you stand on a lot of these social issues, such as racism, reparations, just some of the topics that are really plaguing the culture in our community? Do you have a perspective on those issues?
I do. And, you know, growing up in a predominantly white community, it's kind of odd because people ask me, like, and they assume that, you know, I experience a ton of racism. And to me, a lot of the racism that I experienced wasn't necessarily from white people. It was from other Blacks that were telling me that I didn't fit the mold. And that was frustrating and disheartening at times, because I'm a young man trying to find my identity at the time, and to try to go and seek counsel or to, you know, get some guidance or some understanding, and to just be told, well, like, you don't fit in here, leave. That was tough. And I'm careful now to tell other people about my experience, just because, you know, my experience is different than everyone, but it absolutely changed the way I approach people and the way I have conversations with people, just because I don't want to create that feeling for someone else. And, you know, I'm sorry, what was the other thing that you had mentioned? It was,
yeah, just where do you stand on some of those issues, like you know, on the topics of reparations, the social issues, like how comfortable are you debating those issues?
You know, to me, reparations is a really slippery slope. I think we have to acknowledge that slavery was an incredibly awful thing, but at a certain point, we can't be held back by something that was, right. And I'm a very forward thinker. I try to always look to the future. it's hard for me to say that reparations is something that we need to engage with, just because I don't know where it ends, right? At what point do you stop it? My mom's the victim of sexual assault, and that's the reason I'm here. It's why I'm so pro-life. For me to stand there and say that, well, it's, there's nothing else I can do because, my mom was assaulted and I shouldn't have anything, or I should be entitled to whatever, I think is kind of, it's very against my just natural way of thought. And I think we need to take that similar approach to reparations. It doesn't make a ton of sense. And I think socially, I think the legislative bodies were never intended to get into the weeds on the social issues. That was what society itself was for. The constitutional definition of the legislative body is to regulate commerce and defend the public. And so getting into the weeds on some of the social things is, I think it's something that we have to be careful on. Again, I think it's a slippery slope, and I think it's something that we really need to just take caution. You can't legislate people's hearts, and I think at a certain point, it's a community thing that we all need to step up and rally together around, not a bill or legislation.
Mm-hmm. My husband's pro-life, and because of a very personal experience as well. His mother was 15 when he was born, and he was born 1 year after Roe v. Wade was passed. So thank God he's here. And so hearing your personal story or you mentioning it, alluding to it, definitely strikes a chord there. That being said, because of your personal story, where do you stand on exceptions as it relates to abortion?
That's a really difficult conversation to have. And I'm incredibly thankful for what my mother and grandmother did. And I know my wife is of the same resolve. And so if we were to experience a situation like that, I know my wife would be strong enough to say, no, we need to have this baby, regardless of the situation. But I also understand that some people don't necessarily have that thought. And I think that's why adoption reform is so important. And I think that's why understanding that, just because you've been the victim of something that's horrific doesn't mean that the circumstance or the outcome has to be horrific. This campaign has been an incredibly powerful process for my mother and I, just because we sent out a pro-life mailer as to why we were pro-life, and to kind of hash that story out and to tell it to 10,000 people in a mailer is kind of, it's difficult. And I had to get my mom to really see that, hey, this awful situation that you're ashamed of has really been turned around for positive, and now you've got a son who's able to say that, hey, I'm campaigning on this stuff and this is what I want to change because of this situation, and here's how our story has impacted so many other people. So that's kind of where we're at on everything.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, you've made it through the hot seat. You've answered all the questions. So now we're gonna go and we're gonna have a little bit of fun. Right. This is a segment I call Would You Rather, and I'm sure we've all heard of the Would You Rather questions. The purpose of this is just to really humanize. I like to have fun conversations. So these questions are not political. You cannot give an explanation. They're quick fire. Okay. All right. You ready?
All right.
All right. Would you rather have the ability to travel, time travel to the past and change one historical event, or would you rather travel to the future and witness a major scientific discovery?
The future.
Okay. Would you rather live in a world where everyone can read minds, or would you rather live in a world where everyone has superhuman strength?
Ooh. Read minds.
Ooh, interesting. Oh, I can't ask. Okay. Would you rather have the power to speak and understand all languages fluently, or be able to communicate with animals?
Ooh. Speak and understand all languages fluently.
Okay. And last question. Would you rather live in a fancy world with magic and mythical creatures, or in a futuristic world with advanced technology and space travel capabilities?
100% futuristic space travel.
Okay. Well, that is awesome. That is awesome. Now, I can't let you go without you sharing how people can follow you, all of your social media stuff. I'm going to try to make sure I remember to drop it. I will remember to drop it in the caption below or in the description below for YouTube. But yeah, please share how people can follow you and get connected with you and donate.
Yeah, so I'm on the web. Our campaign page is philipclayforindiana.com, Facebook philipclayforindiana.com. Then you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at jphilipclay.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, for sharing. I like to keep the conversation going. I like to keep it quick because I know that people's attention span is just not where it used to be.
Right.
So, so I appreciate you giving us so many concise answers. And I really like something you said. You said diplomacy over daggers. I really, really like that. I really like the abortion reform conversation. I think that's something that can translate across the board. It's a conversation that then focuses us on the stuff that really matters, which is the kids, right? So I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for running for office.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.